So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me on this episode of Still Brothers. In this program, I have conversations with my atheist brother, Forrest, who runs the channel Latter-day Skeptic. His channel focuses on critiques of the church and religious belief generally. In the end, we may disagree, but we recognize that we are still brothers. And I think that is the secret ingredient for navigating faith differences. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's show. I am joined today by the Latter-day Skeptic, my brother, Forrest Hansen. Forrest, how are you?
Doing good. Thanks for having me. Excited to be in the hot seat this episode.
Yep, as Forrest had mentioned, he's in the hot seat this episode. So what we do is we review each other's each other's content a little bit, and we basically provide feedback and critique. So in this episode, I will be playing more the role of the critic, and Forrest will be playing more the role of the apologist as he sort of defends some of the ideas in one of his videos. So I'm going to pull something up here. I'm looking for the video that we're going to go over. I'm going to try and go through the first. I have two critiques that I wanted to bring to the table, but I first want to kind of steelman them. So in order to steelman them, I want to watch, I want to watch your video here. I'm going to remove this, so I can present
I will say too,
your video on the collective witness model.
To the audience, Jacob's been nice. I've been throwing shots at him in videos, and then he brings me on to actually discuss them. Rather than just making response videos.
Yeah, but it's easier that way. Then we can kind of go back and forth instead of just making response video after response video to one another. Get stuck in the never-ending cycle of that. So let me find it here. It's the one that you made a video. It was critiquing my collective witness model, which I actually really appreciate that you did that, because I am actually right now in the process of making a multi-part series explaining the details of that model. So in this video, let me go to the timestamp that I wanted, which was beginning at around, let's go with, I'm going to first go to around 9:45. Let's watch this and then we'll talk about it. So for those who don't know, my collective witness model basically says that there are five. What it is, I asked this question. I said, how do we know things, right? And what I found is that there's kind of five different things that we use that witness to us if something is indeed true or false. There's intuition. There's sensory experience. Like I know that something, like I know Forrest is here because I'm looking at him. There is reason, where we'll come to the truth of something or something being real because it's real because we've reasoned our way to it. There is outcome. So we'll say that something is true because it continually does the thing that we think it's going to do, that there's some sort of an outcome. And so therefore it's true in that sense. And then another one is authority. So like we are confident that something is true because someone who has shown to be trustworthy and that knows what they're talking about has said it, or a whole bunch of people have said it. Now I've talked about this in other things. I'm not going to go into great detail, but you bring this sort of a framework to the question of, did Joseph Smith have the first vision? And that's kind of what this clip, that's kind of the context of this clip. Go ahead and mute myself.
Let's assume that the collective witness model is a good model and see if it leads to any absurd results. So the first case we'll look at is the claim that Joseph Smith saw the angel Moroni and was told to go dig up gold plates. So, for our intuition, how do we feel about this? What is the intuitive response that we're having when we hear this? When someone claims to have had an angelic encounter and has no evidence of it, how do you feel about that? My intuition indicates that this is a false claim. So, what about my sensory experience? Have I ever seen an angel? Did I see this angel? Did I see footage of this event? Did I feel this event happen? Did I hear the event? Is there anything in this world that I could see that would verify that Joseph Smith saw this angel? My sensory experience gives me no evidence of this claim. Now on to reason. Do angels exist? Could somebody that have died come back to life and then flown into my bedroom? How would he go through the walls? Why would there be gold plates in North America from a civilization that I've never heard of? Is there historical evidence I could use that could confirm this civilization? Reason leads me to believe that having an angelic encounter in your bedroom is probably a false claim. Now, what about the moral outcomes? The outcomes of this event have changed over time and vary from person to person. But broadly speaking, this revelation led to the saints being persecuted and having to flee west. It also led to the execution of Joseph Smith. It led to generations of polygamy. It led to the FLDS. It led to both black people and gay people being excluded from sacraments. It led to the saints going to Utah. And it also led to my family being Mormon and great experiences for generations of people. It's provided meaning for so many people. So the moral outcomes are mixed. Lastly, onto authority. Since this claim is the foundation for the authority of modern prophets, their authority is undermined until we can establish them as an authority. It would be begging the question to assume them as an authority when trying to answer this question. But is there any other authority that can provide us guidance? What about historians? What about scientists? Can scientists prove that angels exist? These authorities lead me to believe that this is a false claim. So according to the collective witness model, intuition says it's false. Sensory experience says it's false. Reason says it's false. Moral outcomes are mixed, and authority says it's false. If you're following the collective witness model, you should doubt that Joseph Smith saw the angel Moroni. Let's move on to our second case.
Oof. I just got punched in the face, right? No, that's a good analysis. I like that you kind of brought that one to the table. So, basically, I don't necessarily know that there's too much to steelman about it. I think it's pretty straightforward. You make a pretty clear argument that
I do want to say.
Okay.
So at the end, I did the 3 analysis. At the end of the last one, I did caveat with, I think, 2 things. One, things like intuition, that can vary person to person. So someone else could be like, no, that totally felt like it was believable to me. And then the other thing is that you really can dive into a lot of these really deep and cherry pick answers. And so as much as I tried to not do that, there's a decent chance you're like, oh, well, you missed this massive piece of information. And I also said, you could probably write a book on the collective witness model analysis on Joseph Smith and Moroni. But I thought that wasn't my honest attempt at trying to run the collective witness model.
And I think that was, so I actually agree with you. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was exactly where I was going. And I appreciated that you put that caveat in there, because the way that you approach the Joseph Smith question can change drastically given other things that you know, the other knowledge that's there, right? So, and I always tell people this: if you come in full on as an atheist, like if a dude came off the street right now and told me like, hey, I saw God and he told me to go get some golden plates, I'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, this guy's crazy, right? So indeed, it is because of other things that anyone would even care to ask the question. So I'm going to put up a different sort of something I'm applying the collective witness model for myself.
Okay, one last point on it. I had a little bit of a hard time too of thinking like, am I analyzing this now? Am I analyzing it from at the time of Joseph Smith? As you can see, I kind of did now, because I added moral outcomes and that were obviously had a long history.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, and
like
the thing is
depending on,
not all of the witnesses, you're right to point this out. And I would say this about the model generally, is that the model doesn't, like, some of the things are totally silent. Like certain things, like you're just not going to have a like an empirical evidence of certain things. Like I don't have any empirical evidence or I would say direct sensory experience. Like the amount of things that I don't have direct sensory experience of, like I don't have direct sensory experience of Beijing. Like
on all three of the different examples I gave, sensory experience was no, just because it's like I wasn't there.
Well, that's the thing. Sensory experience is actually extraordinarily limited. And what's wild is you end up realizing how much of what you believe is based on authority. Like there's a moon floating around Neptune right now.
But, like Beijing, for example, where would you categorize like seeing a picture of it online? Is that sensory experience or is that authority?
That'd probably be authority, actually.
Because I guess you don't know.
You think that photos are reliable. The authority of the image that it's printed on and
You're
stuff.
assuming that the image isn't some made up city.
Yes. So that's kind of the whole Truman Show thing. You know what I mean? Like that sort of that old analogy. So real quick though, I want to pull up something else. Is sort of like if you answer this question, is there some sort of a higher power in the universe? Now, this obviously is my take on this. My intuition tells me yes, and I would actually say that's most people's intuition is that there's some sort of a higher power, whether that's the Christian God or whatever, or some sort of a spiritual force or whatever. Is there sensory data that actually backs this up? Now, maybe I'm taking this on authority, but I would say that and maybe it's intuition, but no, I guess maybe this one was wrong. Maybe I'll change this one and say not applicable or no.
Which one?
The higher power.
No, sorry.
Can you see it on the screen right now? Yeah. The question, is there a higher power? Is there any sense data that would tell me that there is some sort of a higher power in the universe? I'm going to put this one more as a question mark because I haven't thought enough about that. I was thinking more along the lines of like scientifically. I think that there is good scientific data to suggest that the universe has a design to it, that it's actually intelligently designed. I believe that myself. And obviously, people may disagree.
This is basically a fine tuning of the universe argument.
Yep. But that would talk more to the idea of reason, right? So is there a way to reason to there being a higher power? I absolutely believe
I see what you're saying.
That there are good arguments for the existence of God within rational kind of deductive arguments and inductive arguments. Outcomes, I would say that myself, I could say that I've had things that I believe that have come about in my life that are good, that are from some source that's higher. Maybe that's intuitive to some extent or connected to it. And then authority. I would say the authority of the fact that most of humankind throughout most of human history has all assumed something of a higher power would act as some level of authority, So I'm not making the point here that I'm not trying to make the point that like, hey, there's a higher power. My point is that if you believe there's a higher power, and then if you believe that Jesus Christ was the manifestation of that higher power in the world, if you apply this model to that question, was Jesus the manifestation of the higher power? Then the question that we ask about Joseph Smith gets totally turned around, where now, is it reasonable to think if there are indeed miracles in the world and that those actually exist, there is a higher power, and Jesus Christ was who he claimed to be, it creates the preconditions to where the Joseph Smith story could actually be probable utilizing this model. Coming at it from just a naked guy off the street told me he talked to God. Well, the questions I have to ask are, is there a God? Does God speak to people? Does, if I'm in a universe where God speaks to everybody all the time, I might just be like, hey, dude, well, what did he tell you? You know what I mean? It's just, he talks to everybody, right? So in my mind, the critique that I bring to the table is actually that I agree with you. If you bring your lens to the table, the Joseph Smith story is silly. But I would say if you are someone who believes in Jesus Christ and the New Testament narrative, and you are seeking this kingdom of God on earth, and Joseph Smith has made the claim that he has brought a restoration of the kingdom of God to the earth, under priesthood authority, it's a much different, like you have a list of presuppositions that you're bringing to the table when you actually approach the Joseph Smith question.
Yeah, and I think probably the biggest one that, like, in all of my analysis, reason always was like, yeah, you can't, angels don't exist. So, like, you're right. If you're a Christian and you already believe in angels, then the reason category, for example.
Let's grant the premise. Let's say that legitimately, like, Jesus Christ appeared to you and all he said was, the New Testament is true. And then just poof, he went away. Like you're like, there was no doubt, like Jesus Christ was the savior. Then you could see how that would be like, okay, now I got to take into account that it just changes the whole dynamic. You know what I'm saying?
Well, so, yeah, and that's what I was getting at with what I had said, that sensory experience is probably the runner-up with reason, or they might even be on the same plane. Like, they're both very hard to refute, or at a minimum, they're really powerful witnesses.
This is where the episode is going to get gnarly. Just a warning for everyone. I was telling Forrest about this because now we're going to get into something that's super. It's the limit of my knowledge, or not my knowledge, but sort of as I've been theorizing about this. It's kind of the short and simple way of looking at this sort of collective witness model, but it gets really complicated when you start to say, "Wait a minute, how do these things relate to one another?" Okay. So I want to show a clip from Forrest's video again. Let me get the timestamp here. Because you kind of address this, and it's back here at 6 minutes, 30 seconds roughly is when you start to talk about this. Actually let's come here to right about 6:30. Actually, I'm going to come back here because I'm talking about brain surgeons and with the Midnight Mormons. Let's watch this clip and then let's see where we go with it, because I think this is going to get pretty wild. To use this, just so you guys know.
Yeah.
Okay. Like if I have 12 of the best brain surgeons in the world come in here and they give me advice on what to do with my brain cancer, and all of them say the same thing, I, as someone who knows basically nothing about brain cancer and how to handle it, I'm going to listen to those surgeons, right? I'm going to say that I have a level of confidence that what they're saying is true based on the authority that they have and based on their character and their trustworthiness and their experience, all that kind of stuff. Now,
in Jacob's heart surgeon.
Sorry, then I clicked something wrong. So in this, I just wanted to let everybody know I'm talking about authority there and how it's established. So I just wanted to kind of make that thing, and then you make some comments on it.
An analogy: if you're going in for heart surgery, what makes you trust their opinions more than yours? It's because you have reasons to trust them as an authority. They've been to years of school and they've been doing this for a long time, and you haven't. You make the rational assumption that they know more than you do. This whole process is a process of reasoning. Similarly, moral outcomes also only exist through a reasoning process. Without the logical connection between action A and the moral outcome B, there is no such thing as an outcome. An outcome, by definition, requires a connection to the action. For example, are the undoubtedly morally good outcomes of Christmas evidence that Santa Claus exists? Of course not. The morally good outcomes that come from Christmas come from things like spending time with family, eating good food, gift giving, charity. The reasoning process is a prerequisite to even being able to use the word outcome. Additionally, in the case of revelation, it's not even a prerequisite that revelation has to produce good outcomes on the human timescale. I mean, the early saints were persecuted and driven out of their lands because of Joseph Smith's revelation. The collective witness model is making an assumption that revelations will produce good outcomes here on earth. I think it's clear that moral outcomes and authority are just a few of the many subcategories of reason that Jacob doesn't mention, all of which increase our credence in any given proposition.
Okay. All right. So let me kind of steel man what I think is going on here. What you're saying is that some of these witnesses are kind of emergent from reason. They just are repackaged reason, right? What do you think about that sort of analysis?
Yeah, I
reason
think
and sensory experience.
There's just different ways that reason can manifest itself in almost yeah, it's like we know the clear case of reason, very like prepositional logic, but there's also all these other kind of more subtle ways that reason works, such as through authority. So I don't know exactly what the full list is, but there's a lot of things that's like that does speak to me. It's not black and white reason. It's not very A equals B, but A therefore B, I guess. But
Yeah.
it in the same way, it's still increasing my confidence in the answer.
So let me pull up a slide here that I made in preparation for the discussion here. So this is what was that?
I'm like eyeballing this.
Don't worry, there's
All right,
more
all right.
too. Because here's the thing. Okay, we're trying to figure out how these things interact with each other. Now let's use one that I think you and I will 100% agree on. Authority emerges from outcomes. Okay.
Well, I think we'll 100% agree on intuition question mark, because I do agree that like I think that's the most unique one. Anyways, authority coming from
So let
outcomes.
me give this analogy. I had a buddy of mine, philosopher friend, who everyone needs to check out. Oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank on his name right now. I feel bad. He was on my channel before. We talked about Joseph Smith's philosophy. Joseph Lawal, that's his name. He's actually, I believe, he's at Yale right now, studying philosophy. So not a slouch thinker. He was talking with someone, and he talked about, he had this awesome analogy of what he called the green light prophet. So, Forrest, if a guy came up to you and told you that tomorrow you're going to hit all green lights, and you went and hit all green lights, there's a level of authority that would be established about this guy's ability to predict stuff. Now, let's say he said you're going to hit all green lights for the next week or year or 10 years, and it happened. The outcome mixed with reason, right? If the future continues, like, or if the pattern of the past is continuing into the future, we have a confidence in that. It's a rational process we go through. But it's the outcomes themselves that ultimately say, this guy's a prophet. This guy's a green light prophet. Whatever he says is coming true, right? That's sort of the same thing that we're doing with a brain surgeon, right? It's the fact that these guys or their guild, which they're a part of, over and over have like helped people cure themselves of a disease that was going to kill them, that makes us go to them and say, oh, you who knows what you're talking about, enlighten me, because there are outcomes that are demonstrable that show that you know what the heck you're talking about. You have some sort of a connection to the truth and therefore an ability to predict it. Would you?
Yeah, I think I had a little bit of a hang up for a second, but then you do have a direct arrow from reason to authority. I thought you were saying all authority had to go through outcomes.
No,
but yeah, I totally see. Outcomes are a good indicator of authority, or like almost create someone as an authority.
Yeah, so you have authority emerges from outcomes and your reasoning processes. And I would agree with that 100%. Okay? I would say that outcomes, now this is something like, you could say that outcomes are a product of, we reason because we see the outcomes and then we rationalize it. Now this is somewhere where, and maybe this isn't the right one, right? And where does intuition fit? The other thing is, the question is where does reason come from at all? Is reason fundamental, or does reason emerge from something else? Now, a common theory that's out there, and we're just kind of exploring this together, is the idea that sense data. Okay, so here's sort of the theory of this. You and I are taking in sense data all the time. That sense data manifests patterns in the universe. We notice that if I push a rock, it rolls downhill. Therefore, we reason that if we push a rock, it rolls downhill, right? If X, then Y, based on our experience in the actual physical world. And that's what reasoning is. It's our way of mentally constructing the patterns that we see in the universe. And I think that there's something to that theory, which then would take you to kind of hard empiricism, which is basically that the root of all knowledge is sensory data, right? And what we experience. And intuition, where does it fit? Is it even part of this at all? Is it just, does it have any connection to knowledge? We don't know. Okay.
I mean, I think we know more than that. Like I would say it has some relation to knowledge. I don't think either of us think it's useless.
Well, let's.
I think your intuition definitely.
So let's look at some other maps.
Okay, you got more. Okay.
Here's another map of this. I tend to look at it and say, I have this sort of, this isn't my model specifically. I'll actually show you the one that I think best represents the way I view it. But sensory data ultimately has to be like taken in by a subject, by you, right? And let me show another slide here. So you have reality. Sense data acts on the self, on the you, who then interprets the world through that sense data. But there is a self. There is a like
a thinker,
an interface that the sensory data is acting on. A substrate is someone, Jordan Peterson used the word substrate, but reality actually interacts with the self, and then perception. But the self is intuiting and interpreting that data that's coming in. And this is sort of where this is basically what we're looking at here to some extent is what Plato's cave is talking about. There's a reality that exists, but our perception of the reality is filtered through us, right? And that, to some extent, and in some schools of thought, makes us the self. The world of the mind is actually the most fundamental of all realities. Okay. Now, just exploring this, not saying I necessarily agree with that, but I think the model that I look at is something more akin to this. Where do outcomes emerge? They emerge from us having an experience. An experience is sensory data combined with our intuition and sense making of that experience. You might even point reason to it as well. Maybe I should have included an arrow that outcomes are really a process of all of these things. They're experiential in nature, and therefore, we see certain things happening in our life, right? And this sort of is a model to which some of these things emerge. Okay. So, what I'd like to do is, before you offer a critique of this, because initially maybe it just doesn't look right, I actually put a lot of thought into this question. What is most fundamental? Now, this is actually a school in philosophy, in epistemology, which is what we're talking about right now. It's kind of the theory of how do we know the things that we know in the world. There is a theory out there known as foundationalism. And anyway, I think it'd just be good for the audience and everyone to watch this video that talks about this. Let me see if I have the video here, if this is the one. Nope, this is the one on intuition. Sorry, I got to get the other one here. Sorry, guys. Forrest, you want to offer any thoughts so far just while I pull this up?
I think so. When I was breaking down your model, a thing that kept coming up is like, why do we care? What is like the practical effects of these things and being in different orders? And the reason I came to was it helps you create a way of saying, if one that's above says something is false, but something below it says true, then should you prioritize the false over the true?
Yes, and I think we'll go into that.
I think that's why we care about the structure, but it's like,
let me pull this up actually again real quick. My take is that it doesn't matter. It's just because something is more fundamental does not mean it's more accurate. I would not argue that intuition is your most accurate of the witnesses. Absolutely not.
But it's almost like, how is it possible to have to me, it means that like I do think there's supposed to be some connection between a necessity, like if your sense data and your reason, how do I say this? Your reason shouldn't be able to override sense data, but your sense data should be able to override reason. Because reason should be dependent on sense data.
But what about, is that situationally dependent? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, like something like, let's use authority.
So for instance, I would say that most of what we know in physics has absolutely nothing to do with our sense data. It has everything to do with reason. It has everything to do with mathematical formulation. And in fact, we will deny what we're seeing with our own eyes or our own experience of the world based on those rational principles in physics all the time. That's like,
yeah. So that's what I'm saying. So like, how do we have these lines, and what do the lines mean if they don't mean that these are prerequisites?
Maybe they are.
Like a cleaner example is like authority, for example. I think reason is a prerequisite. Like you can't have an authority without having reason.
Well, what if they're all not? What if here's a crazy thought? What if they're not actually different things? They're all manifestations of the same thing.
And I mean, they could be. That's kind of what like, are they manifestations of reason? That's what like.
Well, but that would mean that would have to say that reason is the most fundamental. My hypothesis, just so you know, it'll be the last of the videos that I make on my epistemology series, is positing my theory that intuition ultimately, which I believe is a spiritual thing, is actually the most fundamental.
So how do you solve the problem when the most fundamental thing gets something wrong and something higher up gets it right?
I would say that that I don't say intuition is the spirit. I would actually draw a circle around every one of these, and I would say that's the spirit. Because they all ultimately reduce down to, it's all one thing. It's all actually the spirit. Reason is the spirit. Sense data is the spirit. Authority is the spirit. It's sort of like the whole condition of knowledge is a spiritual interface with reality. Now,
well, so that's actually interesting that you bring that up, because when I was watching your older video, the first video that you talked about the collective witness model, you had the spirit in there explicitly, and then you had, I think, you had like the collective witness of the prophets, and then since then you've like developed it, and I was like, wait, is he trying to say intuition is feeling the spirit? But no. You're saying all of them are manifestations of the spirit.
Yes. And the reason I'm saying that is that these manifestations of the spirit, because they all ultimately, reason itself actually reduces down to sense data, and sense data reduces down to intuition. And this is where I want to start getting into some of this, because what we're talking about is actually a deep philosophical question that they explore. And I think it actually sort of points in this direction, but I want to watch the video, a few different videos that talk about this, because I think they just make the point so much better than you or I can. I'm going to pull this up and get it started here.
Hello, I'm Kevin McCain. I teach philosophy at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and today I'll be discussing the epistemic regress problem. The epistemic regress problem is a very old problem in epistemology. We find reference to this issue as early as the writings of Aristotle. And while it's sometimes used as a way of arguing in support of skepticism, for instance, we find this sort of move in the works of Sextus Empiricus, the most important role of the regress problem is its function in helping us get clear about the structure of epistemic justification. So when we explore the regress problem and various responses to this problem, it helps us to get clearer about how our reasons must be related to one another and to the things we believe in order for those beliefs to be justified. Diving into the regress problem, one of the easiest ways to get a handle on it is to consider the sort of questioning that a small child might put forth when discussing things with their parents. For instance, a parent might say, "It's time to leave the playground," to which a child may respond, "Why?" The parent may respond, "Well, we need to get home." "Why?" "So we can get ready for dinner." "Why?" This sort of questioning can go on for a very long time. Often it'll end with the parent saying, "Because I said so," or eventually just distracting the child and getting him or her to think about something else. But what's interesting is that very sort of why questioning, the continuing of asking for reasons not just in support of the initial claim, but reasons for those reasons. That's what lies at the heart of the regress problem. So take any belief that you have that presumably is a justified belief, so a belief that you have good reason for. Here's a sample one. So assume that you have good reason to believe the president is at the White House. Well, plausibly, someone could ask you, why do you think that? A plausible response might be, well, I saw on the news that the president would be at the White House today. Well, why do you trust what you saw on the news? Well, the news tends to be accurate about this sort of thing. Why do you think that? And you can see we're on to the very same sort of questioning that goes on with the small child and the parent, except for this is questioning your reasons for your belief. This sort of regressive questioning where you give a reason and your interlocutor asks, why do you have that reason? Or what's your reason for your reasons? Is the regress problem. And this is something that we can apply to any belief that you have. This is part of what allowed people like Sextus Empiricus to try to argue that the regress problem leads to a general skepticism. Because if there's a problem for one of your beliefs in this way, it's plausible that this same regress problem can pose a problem for all of your beliefs. Now, when we're exploring this regress of reasons, where you've given a reason for your belief, and then you're asked for a reason for that reason, and a reason for that reason, and so on, it seems like we have three options. One, this chain of reasons comes to an end, so there's an end point. Two, the chain of reasons continues infinitely. So for any reason you give, there's another reason for that reason. Or three, this chain of reasons circles back on itself. So for instance, you have a reason for your belief that P, which is your belief that Q. Your reason for your belief that Q is your belief that R. And your reason for your belief that R is your belief that P. In this case, your reasons go into a circle. The skeptic claims none of these options can generate genuine justification. So, since this applies to all of your beliefs, you have no justified beliefs. But more important than the skeptical take on this is how these three options that we considered, that the chain ends somewhere, that it goes on infinitely, or that it circles back on itself, these give us direction in trying to figure out the structure of epistemic justification. And in fact, all of the primary views of epistemic justification fall somewhere under these three. And then a fourth one being skepticism, just the denial that there are justified beliefs. The first is the most popular view in contemporary epistemology, and arguably the most popular view of the structure of justification since at least the time of Aristotle. That is, the chain of reasons ends. This is foundationalism. So the thought is, all of your justification, so all of your justified beliefs, if they're justified, and we trace back the reasons for those beliefs, and the reasons for those beliefs, eventually we hit a foundation of reasons or beliefs that are themselves justified, but they don't require any further justification.
Okay, I want to pause it there. Specifically here, this idea of foundationalism. Okay, I consider myself a foundationalist, and it'd be interesting for you to pose that question to yourself. Is there something that acts as the foundation of reasons and beliefs that do not require a justification, right? I sometimes refer to this notion of the self-evident, that at some point something it just is true because it's true, right? It's a self-evident truth, and I don't think you can go beyond that, right? And whether and what constitutes something that is actually a self-evident belief is something we could go into. But as we're looking at these, if we were to pull back up our slides that we were looking at here, trying to figure out, is there some sort of a foundation Like, why do you believe the authority? Well, reason tells me to. Well, why do you believe in reason? Well, I believe in reason because of sense data. Why do you believe in sense data? Because it acts directly on me. Like, I don't know what else. Like, that is reality, is what I perceive. And if that which is true is reality itself, like that which is real, then the interface with reality, whatever the direct interface with reality is, if there is any, is indeed the way that we determine if we know something. Does that make sense? So
yeah, it makes sense.
And to some extent, it comes back to this idea here, right? The reason the skeptic says you don't actually know anything, you don't have any justified beliefs, is because everything that you're receiving, even through sense data, is being filtered through you and is just a subjective perception of the reality that exists. So therefore, you never actually interface directly with reality.
Yeah, but I think it's even more than that. Even if you are directly interfacing with reality, you can. It doesn't even solve the regress problem. Where did reality come from? Why do you care about reality? Like, I think, I would say I am actually a
at some
skeptic.
point we have to have. I guess in that case, what my response to that would be that reality is the thing that justifies the belief. It's the fact that reality, like, what are we doing when we're trying to say that something is true? We're trying to say that that thing is in accordance with an objective reality.
Yeah. So in all of these conversations, what I would probably say in terms of, justifying beliefs, I think we start at assumptions, unjustified assumptions, and build up from there all the time. I don't.
And to some, but what I would say is that those assumptions that you're doing, you're right. I agree that I think you likely are a foundationalist like me. We have those base assumptions that are just.
No. I would say I'm a skeptic, but I act as if I'm a foundationalist. My foundation is just unjustified, and I just say I'm gonna have to move forward because I live in this world and I'm gonna make decisions. Like,
no, and I get that. So if you're saying that there is something that you grant as an assumption, would you say that your assumptions are things that you believe are self-evident? In the sense that they're evident to you just as a, like, I don't try and justify them because to me they just are.
Some of them yes, and some of them no.
Okay. So
like I'm very hesitant to put any weight in the self-evident because I think self-evident things are getting proved false all the time. And so,
yeah. But then I would say
the self can be deceived all the time.
Yes.
And this is actually so. Yeah, go ahead.
So I would say that, see, this is where it's kind of challenging because we have to define what constitutes the self-evident, right? Like, here's an example: the great "I think, therefore I am," right? Like, my existence is self-evident. That there is a reality out there is just...
Well, so not exactly. That "I think, therefore I am" is so famous because it's pretty widely accepted that that's about the only thing that you can be sure of.
Yes.
Because the other self-evident things you want to list are...
You're sure of, the reason that you're sure of it is because it's self-evident. It's something that in order for there to be anything, there must be...
No, it's not. It's not self-evident. It is not. It's because it's actually a reason, and it's the law of non-contradiction.
Yes, actually, I do agree. It's the one thing that you can know with certainty via reason. But it's funny to me that the one thing you can know via reason is that the self exists.
Well, but I think the hard work is, what is the self? What, is the self? Because who was it that said "I think, therefore I am"?
No, that was Descartes.
So Descartes, for example, I think tried to prove God from there, and basically people think he failed at it. But the whole, where's it going with that?
My thing is that if the self exists, on some level, and again, it's hazy for me, on some level, there's something to that idea. Because if the self is the one thing that we can be like sure of, then I don't know, for me, that acts as sort of a basis of reality itself.
No, yeah, and that's what Descartes was doing. Was he was like, where is this foundation? And he gets to that. He's like, okay, that's the only thing you can be sure of. Let's see what we can build on top of it. And I haven't read enough of him, but it sounds like most people are kind of like, oh, he failed in the other stuff,
Yeah.
justifying the other beliefs. But that belief is very insightful, and it gives you a foundation.
Yes. But it's funny that foundation, that's why I say self-evident, is simply because if I'm going to try and justify it, I have to justify it against the self. Right?
Okay, so if your definition of self-evident is only that much, that's where, I mean, I could probably agree with you.
Well, let's say that is the. And again, I don't even know. It's hard, man, because this stuff it gets really into the weeds. But I would say something along those lines. There's something there. There's some connection with this idea of foundationalism and the idea of I think, therefore I am, in the existence of the self, right? And so let's continue on real quick. I want to show there's another video.
Also, did you see so I posted a few videos ago. It was kind of like religion doesn't solve the hard questions, and the regress problem was like one of the main points.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I actually looked up that exact video.
Nice. I'm glad you've seen it before. Let me real quickly see if I can pull up this other one. This one explores the question of intuition. Okay. And its relation to epistemology. Specifically, I asked myself this question: is reason or even sense data the most fundamental? Okay. And this video, to some extent, is one of the reasons that I came to the conclusion that I think that it would be hard to say that it's the most fundamental. Anyway, let's check it out here. Was the volume coming through okay on that last one?
Mm-hmm.
For you?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
My name is Jennifer Nagel. I teach philosophy at the University of Toronto. And today I want to talk to you about intuition. We'll talk about what makes a judgment count as intuitive, and we'll also talk about the role played by intuition in philosophy. Many philosophers over the centuries have recognized intuition as a way to gain knowledge, alongside other ways like perception, testimony, and explicit reasoning. English philosopher John Locke gives us.
Notice something here? Perception, sense data, testimony, authority,
yeah,
reasoning, reason. She's not the only one she didn't mention here is outcomes, but she's mentioning intuition here. So I thought that was kind of funny. She's talking about the same stuff I am.
Yeah.
There's a pretty standard way to map out the boundaries of intuition, so that's where we'll start. Locke contrasts intuition to sensory perception on one side and to demonstration on the other. Sensory perception, he notices, is always about.
In our speak, he's talking about intuition versus perception, meaning sense data, and then demonstration as in reason, like actually demonstrably.
Experiments or something.
Yeah.
Particular things. You see this pizza in front of you right now. Maybe you see that this pizza is round. But we aren't restricted to making judgments about particular things. When we judge that no round things are square, we aren't just thinking about that particular pizza, but about a more general and abstract truth. Judging that circles are different from squares, according to Locke, is intuitive. And at least in this kind of case, where Locke thinks we're recognizing features of our ideas, intuition is a perfectly good source of knowledge. We know that no round things are square through intuition. Locke also draws a contrast between intuition and demonstration. Intuition can tell us directly that a circle is not a triangle. But when we get to more complex questions, we need to use demonstration or explicit reasoning. So, for example, we can figure out that the interior angles of a triangle add up to 2 right angles. but we have to go through a series of steps to gain this knowledge, and that's demonstration. Demonstration requires conscious stages. Intuition is immediate. Locke notices that intuition and demonstration are connected, however. Each individual step in a chain of demonstrative reasoning is, or at least should be, intuitive. Contemporary thinkers still draw a
Hold up. Just wanted to make a point there. That's an important point she just made. She's going to do it again later, but she's saying that the demonstration, the actual faculty of actual reasoning is built upon intuitive steps. It breaks down something that we intuitively get, but then what reason is doing is it's sort of breaking down this intuition that we have into its constituent parts. She'll go into this a little bit more, and I think it's really fascinating.
similar distinction, using a variety of labels for it. Psychologists draw contrasts between implicit versus explicit thinking, heuristic versus systematic, automatic versus controlled. It's been argued that these different labels are marking a common divide, and in the spirit of neutrality, the two sides are now often labeled Type 1 and Type 2 thinking. But you will also commonly see the Type 1 side labeled intuitive and the Type 2 side as reflective. The key difference between the two sides, according to leading psychologists like Keith Stanovich and Jonathan Evans, is exactly the difference that John Locke noticed. It's whether you have to go through a series of conscious steps. If I ask you to multiply 5 times 11, the answer, 55, probably comes to mind immediately and without effort. So that's intuitive for you. But if I ask you to divide 5 by 11, you probably have to go through a series of steps in doing the long division. That's reflection, not intuition at work. But notice that when you're doing that long division, it breaks down into a series of single-digit operations, which are each intuitive. Intuition seems to tell us many things, and sometimes when you make an intuitive judgment, you can go back and double-check it reflectively. Even if you naturally judge that 5 times 11 equals 55 intuitively, you can force yourself to think about it reflectively, going over the digits one at a time.
Okay, this one kind of blew my mind. Mathematics is reason, right? Like that's almost like the purest form of reasoning. It's sort of the language of logic is mathematics. But what she's pointing out, what Locke points out, and these others are pointing out, is that mathematics itself is based on things like individuation, intuitive notions of what 1 is versus what 3 is. And in fact, the actual act of reasoning is the act of taking sort of the building blocks of these intuitions and then showing their interactions with one another in sort of this abstract sense. So as I look at this, when we say, okay, well, what's more foundational, reason or intuition? I think this is a pretty compelling case that reason is actually emergent from intuition and potentially even sense data, but even sense data to some extent is intuitive in the sense that, like, I intuit that there is a difference between this chair that I'm sitting in and the desk. I've individuated it. I've drawn lines there conceptually in my mind between chair and, desk. So I don't know. What are your thoughts so far on this sort of this evidence of maybe that reason isn't at the base of it?
So I think I totally agree that intuition is more fundamental than reason. Or yeah, it's almost that underlying assumption that I make that's unjustified. But the issue, and I'm trying to think through how we could solve it, is I think there's almost maybe a difference between your perceived intuition and actual intuition, something like that. Because the problem that this doesn't solve is maybe almost the definition of intuition, because we all know that there's intuition or intuitive things that are actually false.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so what's
and
the difference
that's
between
where-
a true intuition and a false intuition? Is one just you perceived an intuition improperly?
And that's where I would say that the rest of the, like, I guess the way that I kind of built this model of this epistemological model of understanding, how am I confident of that something is true? Intuition alone is not, like, it's super weak. You know what I mean? Like you pointed out, you have all sorts of intuitions that are just wrong, but it also is part of the equation. And in fact, it's a very deep part of it. It's sort of like you can see through the glass darkly with that, but these other things allow for greater levels of clarity and resolution. You know what I'm saying? And so I end up in a situation where, again, for me, what matters is, okay, if I want to try and figure out what's true, what are the tools that I have to sort of explore the full breadth of the objective world, that's out there. I look and I say, I'm trying to figure this all out. I have more than just sense data. I have a variety of tools, and reality, as I see it, is it's far bigger than just raw sense data and stuff like that.
So I have, I think, an interesting thought that's giving me hangups, and it has to do with this idea of like your perception of something versus what it actually is. So reason, for example, can reason ever be false?
Reason is not. I think that question has a bad assumption in there. Reason is a methodology, and so
I guess
I can arrive at a false conclusion, like we all know in logic.
But are you using proper reasoning? What I'm saying is, if you do reasoning correctly, can you have a false conclusion?
Yes, you can. In this sense, I can have two premises and a conclusion that logically follows, and simply have one of the inputs, one of the premises just be false. So reason, but real quick,
but to me, that you were being unreasonable. You had a false assumption or a false premise built in. If you have true premises, if you have a sound argument, then there's no way that reason can ever lead you astray. The mechanism itself is, I would say, perfect, I guess. But the other ones, and
real quick though, hold up. Yes, that is correct. Except for reason doesn't give you the premises. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like mathematics. But
that's what makes reason unique, is that of all the other ones, I don't know about sense data though. Like if you have sense data, you definitely have the data, but your perception of it could be false. It's almost again the way you're interpreting it.
But the thing is that reason is only as good as the inputs that are put into it. That's the other problem. Reason, if I have bad data, like my premises won't be true. Truth is ultimately determined in that by the premises of the experience that you had with the world itself. And so while reason, it's like, yes, it's a good methodology. It's only as good as the information you put into it.
Yeah, so then you get in,
and it's all being filtered through you.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get at is reason seems to be pretty flawless itself, but you can mess it up. Sensory data can be like the reality of the data is true, but you can perceive it improperly. And now how does that apply to intuition? So like intuition, I think we're trying to get at that same dilemma. You can have false intuitions.
I would real quickly I would say that authority is perfect if the data that it has is correct. You know what I mean?
No. So that's not true. Like, you can have an authority that is super smart. It's your 12 brain surgeon analogy. They can still be wrong.
Yeah, because but again, my
Because of
point
which
is
part of the
they can't
equation
be
messed
wrong.
up? What
My
input
point
did you mess up?
is that they are only as good as the data that gets put into them. They're only
No, but the
output
data
they
was
give is
great.
only as good as the inputs. The output of reason is only as good as the inputs. The sense data is only as good.
No, but so authority can get messed up just because of authority. Like, everything before that can be good, and then the authority can mess it up because an authority is just a person typically. But
Yeah,
reason, if it has proper inputs, reason cannot be messed up. And I think same with sense data. Intuition has this weird problem of you have messed up intuitions all the time. I think a good way to solve it is there's probably a way we can say there's true intuitions and there's false intuitions, and we have to have some way of determining which one is a real intuition.
Yeah, and to some extent, that's what I think that the rest of the model helps us to understand, or at least to grant us greater confidence in. I don't
So
know
like,
that
yeah,
I
you keep going down, and if it's working well, then you can assume that intuition probably was
aligned in some way.
true.
Again, I don't know that we're going to get to the bottom of some of that. I think, let me see what else I have here. So I'm going to give you, and obviously this probably isn't going to be something that you're going to agree with. And if it is, then I look forward to seeing you at church on Sunday. But I want to show you something in here that I think is interesting, at least from a scriptural standpoint. Is if intuition is something that's deeply fundamental, I find this scripture to be really compelling. It's from 1 Corinthians. It's interesting that it's to the Corinthians. This is actually Paul writing to the people of Corinth, who are a highly rational group. And I'm not saying he's making the exact same arguments or the same knowledge that I have, but there's some interesting corollaries here. He says, but God hath revealed, talking about the things that he's talking about, them unto us by his Spirit. For the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the deep things of God. For what man, this is the one that really got me, for what man knoweth the things of a man, save the spirit of man which is in him? So even so with the things of God knoweth no man but the Spirit of God. So go to the next slide. And he's talking about the stuff. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is of God, that we may know the things that are freely given to us of God, which things we also speak, not in the words which man's wisdom teacheth. You might say that reason alone teacheth, but which the Holy Ghost teacheth, comparing spiritual things with spiritual, something more intuitive. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned, or maybe discerned on some deeper level. The Book of Mormon says, for the Spirit speaketh the truth and lieth not, wherefore it speaketh things as they really are, and of things as they really will be. Wherefore these things are manifested plainly unto us plainly for the salvation of our souls. I want to go real quick to this diagram again. This idea of reality being filtered through the self, and the quality of the self playing into that potential ability to even perceive the full breadth of reality. I'm of the opinion that our epistemology, our ability to be confident on what is actually real, is filtered through all of those things. But that, all of these different things, and they all work together. But I think that they all reduce down to us and to the quality of what we are. And we won't be able to see the full picture of reality unless we ourselves are right. And when you talk about the spirit, when people talk about the spirit, a lot of times they're referring merely to intuition. I personally think that's a really myopic view. I believe the spirit manifests itself, right? That this emergent thing of spiritual knowledge, rightly ordered intuition, manifests in rightly ordered sense data, in rightly ordered reason with the right inputs, rightly ordered outcomes that are rightly perceived as what they are. And obviously that, within an authority emerges from all of that as someone can predict the future because they have this right understanding of the nature of reality. And I could even say that, you might even say that with AI, right? If it has a full comprehension of all of the inputs and outputs and systems of the world, then it had a right understanding, quote unquote, the AI of everything that existed, it would be the ultimate authority. And it could literally be a prophet and tell you what you're going to eat for breakfast tomorrow, something like that. So that's my view of the interplay between these. I'll let you kind of have sort of some of the final comments or critiques of that sort of notion.
I think in general, you're building a bigger and bigger model and structure off of a weak foundation.
Uh-huh.
It's like I think it would be more interesting to dial into any one of these and say, like, how does reason and authority, like, and for example, these arrows, could the arrows go two ways? Like, could the sense data inform your intuitions?
Yes, I
So why are these
actually,
one-way
I would
arrows?
actually agree with that. I think that this is actually probably a bad diagram. I think that this shows
And then
but what if it was all an integrated network of just like, this is the way that we know, but it does seem that some things are more fundamental. And in fact, that whole
but
thing,
even and
this
so what
thing
does
I would call
fundamental
the
even
spirit.
mean? This is what I'm saying is, like, does fundamental mean that it's a prerequisite for everything that emerges from it?
Yes, but I think that there's an interplay.
Yeah, it's hard. I also think another issue I'm having is, like, you should have a line that I think goes from intuition to reason. Because I think you can reason without any sense data.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think you might move sense data over and have it feed to reason. The reality is, this is an ugly, rough work in progress diagram that, as I've thought more about, I've had arrows going everywhere. And if anything, if the audience members or if you like, I just think that there's something to be said for recognition of the fact that our claims to knowledge or to confidence in the reality of any given proposition has something to do with at least, and maybe more than this, at least these things. And these things seem to have a very interesting, both emergent and multi-directional relationship with one another. What that exactly is, I've kind of sort of given a little bit here, that I think where certain things seem to emerge from, but like you, I think you make a great point. Does sense data and does that actually affect our intuitions? Do outcomes change our intuitions? I would say yeah.
And I'm also looking for, like, anything that makes any of these unique. So, like, how come could authority go back in any other direction? Like, I don't think it would make any sense to say that authority could affect reason.
I would say that. Well, you might even ask, you learned reason from an authority.
Well, this is actually where I think I would just get rid of outcomes and authority. I think they are reasoning. And then for one, that just simplifies the diagram quite a bit. It's like something that we can actually chew on a little bit.
I wouldn't though. I think outcomes have very little to do with reason. They do have more to do with experience.
So this was kind of the point I was trying to make in the video. The word outcome has the word, well, it says it's coming out of something. So the being able to say that is an outcome of this, that is a process of reasoning.
Yeah. But I would say, for example, let me think about that for a minute.
Is this is my phone?
No, that's, I would say this. The outcome that I'm talking about is not the description of the outcome or the recognition of the outcome. It is the actual experience of the outcome itself. Okay. So like it is I almost wanted to put, instead of outcomes, I want to put experience, like the actual experience of something. Like you experience greater well-being because of X, Y, or Z. Oops. Sorry, I got the wrong button.
So I think that still works with what I'm talking about though, is in order to connect that experience to where it came from, that's a logical process. That's a reasoning process. Otherwise, you just have an experience. You're saying, I feel great. Oh, wait, I feel great because I worked out.
But the thing is that intuition of having the great experience has enormous impact on what people do and think is true. They may not be able to reason their way out of it. They may not even consciously like be able to understand it in any way. Reasoning is very much a conscious activity. Outcomes are just an experience that you have.
But what I'm saying is, if you don't know where that experience is coming from, then how are you going to act on that? How are you going to say, wow, working out made me feel good, so I'm going to work out more to get more of that? Otherwise, it's like, oh, I feel happy. And an outcome, for example, like a pen is only an outcome if you say, oh, the pen was made by this guy, so the pen is an outcome from that guy. Otherwise, it's just a pen. Like an outcome in the diagram I showed, an outcome in like you can't just take B, you have to take A leads to B. Then that makes B an outcome. Otherwise, you just have B.
Yeah, but the thing is that process happens
intuitively, maybe
post hoc. It is after the outcome has happened, we reason about the outcome.
So I agree, but it's only a witness at that point. You can't just say I have a pen.
I think that, and in fact, I think this
it doesn't point in any direction. How could it be a witness? It doesn't tell you anything about it.
Let's look into this real quick. I want to share another video about this because I think that this, and it's one of your favorites. I think this might spawn a whole big conversation, but it plays into what we're talking about here.
It's going to be Jordan Peterson.
It's our friend. No, it's the elephant and the rider. Here we go. I think this would be good for the audience to see because it definitely relates to this.
Our minds are pattern matchers that make very quick judgments within a second usually. And then we recruit our reasoning afterwards to justify what we've just done. So the metaphor I used in my previous book, The Happiness Hypothesis, was that the mind is divided into parts like a rider on an elephant. The rider is our conscious reasoning. It's pretty small and impotent, but it acts like it's in charge. And the elephant is the other 99% of the mind, which really runs most of our behavior. Most of us spend a lot of our time trying to persuade other people's riders. We give them all these reasons. Here are the 7 reasons why you're wrong or why you should see it my way. When in fact, the way to persuade people is to speak to the elephant first. The elephant is a lot stronger than the rider. If you get somebody feeling the truth of what you're saying or feeling that they like you or like what you're saying, and the elephant kind of wants to go in your direction, then it's effortless to persuade the rider to go along. But if the elephant is digging in its heels, the elephant doesn't want to go, doesn't want to be dragged along by you to the conclusion that you're trying to get him to, then there's really nothing you can say that will persuade the rider.
So, kind of back to what we were saying is, so you have, again, it seems here in Haidt's kind of analysis that conscious reasoning is oftentimes post hoc to some sort of an intuitive experiential experience, right? That's kind of the point that I'm driving at here with what you're saying is we experience the outcome. We will reason about it, but the experience of the outcome itself, it may not even be rational the way that we react to it to a certain extent. But I guess it's just not that I don't see necessarily what you're coming from technically. I guess it's just I don't see where it seems to me that the experience comes before the reasoning. The intuition of an outcome, the experience of the outcome comes first, and then we rationalize what it means.
I think a good way to describe it is I think if you go back to the intuition is the building block of reason, what you're doing when you're doing outcomes is you're doing 1 + 1 = 2. You are seeing this, you're like putting together like, oh, I have a thing here plus this other thing equals this makes me feel good. This is awesome. This is a witness. That is all that outcomes are. It's just a pattern matching connection.
I would actually push back on that in this sense. I think that you just have the experience that you're happy.
So I agree, but at that point, it's not a witness. So give me any example, like you, in order for it to witness the truthfulness of something, it can't just be, I'm having an experience, because yeah, you're having an experience. That's great. But it's not saying anything about anything else until you notice the pattern.
To some extent, I think we might be splitting hairs. I think the example that I would use is people that are out there who they can't explain why they believe certain things. They don't have a rational sort of basis for it, but they know it works, right? It produces the outcome that they want.
Okay, so I see where our disconnect's coming from. I'm not saying that you have to explain how it's working. I'm saying you have to identify the pattern, which is the pattern is, I don't know why this is happening, but when I do A, I get result B and I like that. So I'm going to keep doing it. And that pattern recognition is reasoning. Even though you have no idea what A even means, or you don't know why B is coming.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying.
No, I could see that. And I think there is a relationship there between reason for sure. My thing is I guess that, I differentiate between the experience itself and then the reasoning about the experience.
Okay. So give me an example of just the experience.
Well, no, I'm not saying that you don't have both together. I'm just saying is that the outcome itself is the outcome itself is the experience itself, not the sense that we make out of the experience. In fact, we can have an experience, then misunderstand and misinterpret it, right? I look at it as outcomes. The experience of something comes out of the sense data and the intuitions that you have about that. Right.
But remember, this is all part of the collective witness model. How does it witness if you only understand an experience?
How does it witness if you only understand? Repeat that.
Yeah. So like if I go to the gym and work out, and then after I work out, I feel really good. And now I'm saying, okay, now I know if I go to the gym and work out, I feel good. So that's the whole P. That's A leads to B. What you're saying is I feel good. What is I feeling good a witness to? What is it telling you about the world? It doesn't tell you anything until you make the connection, until you use the reasoning process to match a pattern.
Maybe so. I don't know.
And this is when I was critiquing your video. It's kind of like, why does this matter?
Well, but let's look at this. Let's just go back to this whole thing. My hypothesis is that all of this stuff is descriptions of the same thing manifesting in different ways. I think that they all seem to be connected to somehow that I think, therefore I am root, something intuitive, the faculty that makes you human, the faculty that gives you the ability to reason at all, that spirit, quote unquote, whatever that thing is at the root of all of this, is ultimately the connection of all of these things into some sort of it's almost like we're talking about the same thing, but in different manifestations of the same thing. something like that. Now, I think we're starting to get down on it here. I think we've dug in about as far as we can go.
Yeah.
But interesting stuff that I think everybody should consider. So as you offer the critique of my video with the collective witness model, I mean, yeah, I think that you were right to point out that there are some of these things may emerge from others, and there is a deep question to ask: is there a foundation of knowledge? Is foundationalism kind of the way to go, which I believe is? And if so, what is that foundation and what does it look like? And so I don't claim to have the perfect answer. I obviously have some answers that are based on our hypotheses that accord with some of the ideas in the church and in my faith and in Christianity generally. But I believe it's a subject I'll leave to everyone watching and to you to continue to explore. So any final thoughts, Forrest?
Yeah, I just want to say in my video too, I made sure that I love that you made the model. I like that you're thinking about it this kind of way. Obviously, that's very intuitive for me, also intuitive. So I give you a lot of kudos for that. I also think for the most part, you present it as hey, this is a working hypothesis to play with. So I commend you for pushing into this area, because from my perspective, not a lot of Mormons are doing this. And two, it's just a challenging, fun, some fun areas to explore.
Cool. All righty. Well, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. And you can see that a Latter-day Saint, an ex-Latter-day Saint, we can have conversations and still get along. It's all good. So take care, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Hey, if you enjoyed this episode and want to try to improve your engagement with those you disagree with, I want to share with you a few of the principles that Forrest and I try to abide in these conversations. First, we try to steelman each other's perspective before offering a critique. We make sure that the other person feels that we have not misrepresented their point of view. When you are not addressing the actual argument the other person is making, you just end up talking past each other. Second, we seek clarity, not consensus. We are trying to understand the nature of our disagreement and clarify the distinctions between our different points of view by comparing and contrasting the different ways we justify our position. Instead of the discussion being about winning an argument, it's about two people curiously exploring how they arrived at their different conclusions. And third, just things as simple as defining your terms can do immense good in conversation. So often people talk past each other simply because the words they are using are vague or can mean different things to different people. Much conflict comes not because of disagreement, but simply because of confused language and misunderstanding. In the end, our shared goal in these discussions is not just to engage with each other on a variety of topics, but hopefully to model how people with wildly different opinions can engage meaningfully. Do we always succeed? Of course not. But we hope that to some extent, we can be part of the solution in bridging the gaps between people of different opinions.